The birthday party that changed everything. What would you do if your own daughter canceled your 70th birthday celebration? For more important plans, how far would you go to prove that you still matter in this world? What you're about to hear will shock you. Are you ready? Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm 70 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my daughter's cruel dismissal led me to throw the most spectacular birthday party of my life, completely without her. What happened next will absolutely blow your mind. I've lived in Salem, Oregon for 45 years, in the same Victorian house where I raised my 3 children after my husband passed away. When I was just 35, the house sits on Maple Street, surrounded by towering oak trees that have watched me transform from a young widow into what my daughter Rachel calls an elderly woman who needs to accept her limitations. For months, I had been planning my 70th birthday celebration, not because I thought turning 70 was particularly special, but because I realized I had been invisible in my own family for far too long. My children, Rachel, Michael, and Jennifer, rarely called unless they needed something. My grandchildren knew me as the woman who sent checks on holidays, but rarely got invited to their important events. The invisibility had crept in so gradually that I almost didn't notice it happening. It started 5 years ago when George died, leaving me alone in our big house. Initially, my children were attentive, calling daily and visiting frequently. But as their own lives resumed their busy pace, I became background noise, someone to check on occasionally, like ensuring the furnace was working or the gutters were clean. Rachel had developed this particularly patronizing tone when speaking to me, as if I were a child who needed constant supervision. "Mom, did you remember to take your vitamins? Mom, are you sure you should be driving in this weather? Mom, maybe you should consider getting one of those medical alert necklaces." Each question chipped away at my sense of competence and independence. Michael lived in Seattle with his tech startup job and treated our conversations like brief status updates. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Good. Great. Listen, I'm slammed with this new project, but I'll call you next week." Next week would stretch into 3 weeks, then a month. Then I would be the one calling him. Jennifer, my youngest, had moved to Denver and seemed to view me as a relic from her past that she preferred to keep at a comfortable distance. Our relationship had dwindled to obligatory birthday and Christmas calls, where she would update me on her life in bullet points while clearly multitasking. The grandchildren were even worse. Tyler, Rachel's 16-year-old son, would grunt monosyllabic responses when forced to speak to me. Sarah, Michael's 12-year-old daughter, would get on the phone for exactly 30 seconds before claiming she had homework. Jennifer's twin boys, now 14, had somehow never learned to call me grandma. I was just Eleanor to them, as if I were their mother's casual acquaintance. I spent weeks creating the perfect guest list, planning a menu of my famous lasagna and tiramisu, and even ordering special decorations for the backyard. I envisioned my family and old friends gathered under the string lights I had purchased, sharing stories and laughter like we used to when George was still alive. The idea for the party had actually come from a painful realization 3 months earlier. I had been hospitalized for a minor procedure, Nothing serious, just outpatient gallbladder surgery, and had given Rachel my emergency contact information. When I woke up from anesthesia, confused and asking for my family, the nurse looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Walsh," she said gently, "we called your daughter, but she said she couldn't leave work today. She asked if someone else could pick you up." Someone else? As if I were a package that could be collected by any random person rather than her own mother who had just had surgery. I ended up taking a taxi home, sitting in my empty house with surgical bandages and strict post-op instructions, completely alone. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized that I had become an inconvenience to the people I loved most in the world. The plan was simple. Rachel would help me coordinate everything since she lived closest, just 20 minutes away in downtown Salem. She had seemed enthusiastic when I first mentioned it, even offering to handle the invitations and help with setup. For the first time in years, I felt like my daughter and I were connecting over something meaningful. But even during the planning process, I should have seen the warning signs. When I suggested inviting some of my former teaching colleagues, Rachel wrinkled her nose and said, "Mom, do you really think people that old want to come to a party?" When I mentioned hiring a small jazz ensemble, she laughed and said, "That seems a bit much for a 70th birthday, don't you think? Maybe just put on some background music." Every suggestion I made was met with gentle discouragement designed to make my celebration smaller, quieter, more appropriate for someone my age. I began to realize that Rachel wasn't helping me plan my dream party. She was managing my expectations downward to match her vision of what an elderly woman deserved. The manipulation became more obvious when I discovered that Rachel had been making decisions without consulting me. I found out by accident that she had called the local bakery and canceled the custom cake I had ordered, replacing it with a simple sheet cake because something smaller would be more practical. When I confronted her about it, she acted like she was doing me a favor. "Mom, you were spending way too much money on all this. I'm just looking out for you." But I realized she wasn't protecting my finances. She was embarrassed by my enthusiasm and trying to contain what she saw as an old woman's desperate bid for attention. But then came the phone call that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week before my birthday. I was in my kitchen, carefully writing out place cards in my best handwriting, when the phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered cheerfully, expecting to discuss final details. Instead, her voice was cold and businesslike. The tone she used when firing employees at her marketing firm. "Mom, listen. Something's come up for Saturday. We're going to need to postpone your little party." Little party. Those two words hit me like a physical blow. She continued without waiting for my response, explaining that her husband Brad had been invited to play golf with some important clients, and her teenage son Tyler had a lacrosse tournament that might be really important for college scouts. She spoke as if my 70th birthday was a minor inconvenience that could be easily rescheduled, like a dentist appointment or oil change. "We can do something smaller next weekend," she said dismissively. "Maybe just dinner at Applebee's or something. Much more appropriate for someone your age anyway." What she didn't tell me, but what I learned later, was that Brad's golf game had been planned for weeks. And she had known about Tyler's tournament for over a month. She had deliberately waited until the last minute to cancel on me, hoping I wouldn't have enough time to object or make alternative arrangements. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the carefully written place cards and the printed menu I had spent hours perfecting, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. My own daughter had just reduced my milestone birthday to an afterthought, something to be squeezed in between her family's real priorities. But as she continued, talking, making excuses, and offering hollow apologies, I experienced something I hadn't felt in decades. Pure, crystalline anger. Not the weary resignation I had grown accustomed to, but a blazing fury at being dismissed so casually by someone I had loved and sacrificed for my entire adult life. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Of course, dear," and hung up the phone. But as I stood there in the silence of my empty house, something began to shift inside me. A spark of defiance that I hadn't felt in decades began to flicker to life. Who said I needed Rachel's permission to celebrate my own birthday? Who said I had to wait for my family to decide when I mattered? That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old address book and started making phone calls. I called my former colleagues from the elementary school where I had taught for 30 years. I called my neighbors, my book club members, and even tracked down some of my former students who were now adults with families of their own. I called Georgia's old army buddies' widows, and the women from my church quilting circle. To my amazement, person after person said yes. They remembered me not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as Eleanor, the teacher who had made learning fun, the neighbor who brought soup when someone was sick, the friend who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. But the most surprising call was to my former principal, Dr. Margaret Chen, who was now 82 and living in a retirement community. When I explained what had happened with Rachel, her response was immediate and fierce. "Eleanor Walsh," she said, "you were the most innovative teacher I ever supervised. And if your daughter can't see what a remarkable woman her mother is, then it's her loss. But more importantly, it's time you stopped waiting for other people's permission to shine." Dr. Chen offered to help spread the word through the retired teachers network. And within hours, my phone was ringing with people eager to celebrate with me. Teachers I hadn't spoken to in years, parents of former students who remembered how I had changed their children's lives, community volunteers I had worked with on various projects. The most emotional call came from Maria Santos, a former student who was now a successful lawyer in Portland. "Mrs. Walsh," she said through tears, "you're the reason I learned to love reading. You're the reason I believed I could go to college. I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything in the world." As I made each call, I felt something awakening inside me that had been dormant for far too long. I wasn't just planning a party anymore. I was reclaiming my life. But I didn't stop there. Oh no, this was going to be a celebration worth remembering. The transformation began with a trip to downtown Salem. That felt like stepping back into my own power. I walked into the boutique where I had always admired the clothes, but never bought anything because Rachel always steered me toward more practical options. This time, I ignored the conservative section and chose a deep purple dress that made me feel vibrant and alive. The saleswoman, a young lady named Katie, was incredibly enthusiastic. "That color is absolutely stunning on you," she exclaimed. "You look like you're ready to conquer the world." When I told her about my party plans, she insisted on helping me pick out accessories and even recommended a hair salon dot at the salon. I asked for something bold, layers, and highlights that took 10 years off my face. The stylist, Robert, listened to my story and declared, "Honey, we're not just doing your hair today. We're staging a revolution." I hired a local catering company to supplement my homemade dishes. I rented elegant tables and chairs, transforming my backyard into something that looked like a scene from a magazine. I even hired a jazz trio, 3 college students who were thrilled to earn some extra money, playing the old standards that George and I used to dance to. But the most significant addition was a photographer. I hired Sarah Mitchell, a professional, whose work I had admired in the local newspaper. "Mrs. Walsh," she said when we met, "I want to document this day properly. This isn't just a birthday party. This is a statement." The morning of my birthday dawned clear and beautiful. By 10 a.m., I was dressed in the deep purple dress I had bought specifically for this occasion, not the conservative beige cardigan that Rachel always said was more appropriate for my age, but a vibrant color that made me feel alive and visible. As I put the finishing touches on my makeup and jewelry, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see an elderly woman with limitations. I saw Eleanor Walsh, educator, mother, survivor, and a woman who had decided she wasn't ready to fade into the background just yet. The first guests arrived at noon, and by 12:30, my backyard was filled with laughter, conversation, and the sound of clinking glasses. The jazz trio played softly in the corner while people filled their plates, with an incredible spread of food that made my original lasagna plan look quaint by comparison. But the real magic happened in the conversations. Former students shared stories about lessons I had taught them that went far beyond reading and arithmetic. Neighbors talked about kindnesses I had shown them that I had almost forgotten. Friends from church reminded me of the comfort I had provided during their darkest hours. Dr. Chen arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance with her walker decorated with purple ribbons to match my dress. The crowd parted for her like she was royalty, and when she embraced me, she whispered, "Look round, Eleanor. This is what happens when you stop shrinking yourself to fit other people's expectations." Maria Santos brought her entire family, including her teenage daughter, who presented me with a handwritten letter about how my teaching philosophy had influenced her mother's parenting style. "You're not just my mom's favorite teacher," the girl said. "You're part of our family story." For the first time in decades, I wasn't being tolerated or managed. I was being celebrated, not as someone's mother or someone's grandmother, but as Eleanor, a woman who had touched lives and made a difference in the world. The party was in full swing when I noticed a car pulling into my driveway around 3 p.m. My heart sank when I recognized Rachel's SUV. She had come, probably out of guilt or obligation, and I braced myself for her disapproval of my extravagant celebration. But when Rachel and her family walked into the backyard, their expressions weren't what I expected. Rachel's mouth literally fell open as she took in the scene. The elegant tables, the professional catering setup, the jazz musicians, and most shocking of all, the 50-plus people who had come to celebrate me. I watched her face cycle through confusion, embarrassment, and finally something that looked like respect. She had expected to find her pathetic elderly mother sitting alone, waiting to be rescued. Instead, she found a woman who had created her own rescue. Tyler, my grandson, was the first to speak. "Grandma, this is incredible. I had no idea you knew so many people." He seemed genuinely impressed, and for the first time in years, he looked at me like I was someone worth knowing rather than just someone he was obligated to visit. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. As the afternoon progressed, I watched Rachel move through the party like an anthropologist discovering a lost civilization. She listened to my former students talk about my innovative teaching methods. She heard my neighbors describe how I had organized meal trains for sick families and started the community garden that still flourished 3 blocks away. She learned about the scholarship fund I had quietly established in George's memory that had helped dozens of local kids attend college. Rachel was discovering a version of her mother she had never bothered to see, not just the woman who had raised her and sacrificed for her family, but a person who had been actively contributing to her community and touching lives long after her children had grown up and moved away. Around 5 p.m., as the party was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Rachel approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mom," she said quietly, "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were, but I didn't realize you were." She struggled to find the words. "You didn't realize I was still a person," I finished for her, not unkindly, but with absolute clarity. "You saw me as your elderly mother who needed to be managed and tolerated, not as Eleanor who has been living a full life, whether you noticed or not." The conversation that followed was perhaps the most honest one Rachel and I had ever had. She admitted that she had started seeing me as a burden rather than a person. Someone whose needs and wants were less important than those of her real family. She had been so focused on her own busy life that she had forgotten I had a life too. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. As we talked, surrounded by the remnants of my spectacular birthday celebration, Rachel made a confession that stunned me. She revealed that she had been struggling with her own sense of invisibility in her marriage and career. Despite her successful job and seemingly perfect family, she felt like she was disappearing, becoming just Brad's wife and Tyler's mom rather than Rachel. She had been so threatened by my vitality and independence because it reminded her of what she was losing in herself. My party hadn't just been a celebration. It had been a mirror, showing her what it looked like when a woman refused to become invisible. Over the following months, something beautiful began to develop between Rachel and me. Instead of dutiful, obligatory visits, she started coming by because she wanted to spend time with me. She asked about my community work, my friendships, my plans and dreams. She started seeing me as someone she could learn from rather than someone she needed to manage. But the changes went beyond just our relationship. Rachel began making changes in her own life, setting boundaries with Brad about shared responsibilities, and rekindling friendships she had neglected. She even started volunteering at the local literacy center, inspired by stories she had heard about my teaching days. My other children, Michael and Jennifer, heard about the party from Rachel and reached out with a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. They too had been guilty of seeing me as a static figure, rather than a dynamic person still living and growing. Today, almost a year later, my calendar is fuller than it's been in decades. I've joined the community theater group, started taking art classes at the local college, and even began dating a wonderful widower I met at the senior center. Not because I was lonely or desperate, but because I realized I still had love to give and receive. My relationship with my children and grandchildren has been transformed. They don't just call when they need something anymore. They call because they're genuinely interested in what I'm doing. They've learned to see me as Eleanor first, and their mother, grandmother second. The birthday party that Rachel tried to cancel became the catalyst for the most vibrant chapter of my life. I learned that visibility isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. I learned that it's never too late to refuse to be diminished, to insist on being seen, to celebrate your own existence with or without permission from others. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you invisible is to shine so brightly that they can't possibly ignore you. My 70th birthday party wasn't just a celebration of the years I had lived. It was a declaration that I wasn't done living yet. And in case you're wondering, I'm already planning my 71st birthday party, and this time Rachel is helping me coordinate it. But the difference is, now she's helping because she wants to celebrate the incredible woman her mother is, not because she feels obligated to manage the elderly woman she thought I had become. So I have to ask you, when was the last time you truly celebrated yourself? Not because someone else thought you deserved it, but because you knew you did. And if your own family started treating you like you were invisible, would you quietly accept it? Or would you light up the world to prove them wrong? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear about your own moments of reclaiming your visibility and worth.